So, if you've been in fandoms for any amount of time, especially recently, you've probably seen some variation of like the pro shipper slash anti harassment slash pro fiction side versus quote unquote antis. And even though this is like a huge thing to get into, I kind of want to just give my random thoughts on it and why I am personally against both sides. I don't like either side, and I will be explaining why. Uh, I usually think centrism is a coward's way out from developing an actual opinion on something, but this is the one time where I genuinely have seen the harm that both sides have done, and I'm saying this as someone who both used to be pro fiction and also was an anti up until, quote unquote, anti up until very recently. And I realize I don't fuck with either. So let's get into why. Before that, though, I just want to give a quick disclaimer that if you do know what this discourse is about, this is probably not needed, but I am going to be discussing some darker subjects and things that could be potentially a lot of very triggering subjects in this video, so if you're not up for that and you don't want to deal with that, skip this one, because that's kind of what this video is about. Sorry about that. Please go watch like a puppy video or something. Your mental health is more important than some dude's opinions online. If you don't know what this is something that is common in fandom spaces to talk about on shipping mainly, but we'll get into how I think it's a little deeper than that and how I think it's more about how one consumes art rather than the art that they actually consume. I just thought I'd give my 2 cents on this because I do talk about media a lot on here and I am in fandom spaces a lot, and I thought I'd just, have my opinions out there. I'm going to be strawmanning both sides, and when I say pro shippers or antis, please do not think that I mean every single person who identifies as either, because there is variety of thought in here, but I am further proving the point that this is not a black and white debate. It is not just the pros versus the antis, and both will just accuse you of either being a Bible-thumping conservative who just wants to censor all art that makes you personally uncomfortable, or as a disgusting piece of shit who needs to rot in hell and die because they personally misread the thing you created and came with their own conclusions. And I think that's part of the problem. So when I am saying, oh, none of them do this, I'm saying a vast majority that I've personally seen on either side, or am just, each side has like different opinions and stuff like that. I am just talking about those, okay? So please don't think that I am talking about you specifically. I'm just talking about why I personally don't like either side, and I don't like the arguments from either side, and why I don't really identify as either. Anyways, let's get into this. So to keep it really simply, one side, the anti-harassment, pro-fiction, pro-ship, I'm just gonna call them pro-ship for now, like throughout this video, because they're all basically the same thing. Basically, they call themselves that because they think no censorship in media. People should be allowed to ship and write and create whatever the hell they want, regardless of more personal, moral, or ethical boundaries. You should be allowed to do what you want. And the other side, the antis, who I've never actually seen someone identifying themselves as an anti in my entire life, but we'll just put it as like the quote-unquote opposite side of this debate, are against that to whatever reason. Maybe there's like, oh, maybe it's like incorrect to ship certain things. Maybe people have honestly normal apprehensions towards people who ship things like incest or pedophilia or like teacher-student or whatever the hell. And they're just against that. And that's fine. Now, this seems like a pretty simple debate, right? Well, you'd be wrong, because a lot of people take the pro-fiction and all that very much at face value, but the pro-fiction side is very dishonest, I think, about their intentions, because they will talk a lot about, oh, we should have freedom to express whatever we want. We should have freedom to write fan fiction or draw fan art about whatever the hell we want, and like being against censorship. And they try to like prop themselves up as like these morally just free speech warriors or something, when in reality they just want to write, like, I don't know, Homer x Bart smut fanfic or something. And they're not upfront about that. And I think they should, because that's really what they are at the end of the day, defending. And I'm, like, old enough, I guess, where I don't really care what people do. If you want to do that, like, fine. I just don't want to be around it. Probably keep it private. I'll get into that later, but I don't know. Now, I mentioned it earlier, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone identify themselves as an anti, but, and even though technically on paper, my general preferences, I guess, lean more towards antis, as well as, like, the general circles that I'm in are more anti, I think artistically, the way that I approach things, it's much more closer to the pro-ship area, and it's part of the reason why I really hate this debate and why it is framed as just, like, two sides. Oh, there's only the side of, like, because if you exist in any fandom circles, both will be extremely fast to accuse you of anything if you're not, like, so vehemently, like, identifying and making it your whole fucking identity about, like, being on one side. Even though, again, this debate is much more complicated than that, but the fact that this debate exists at all kind of, like, forces you to be put into either box. And, like, Twitter and most social media websites are not, like, equipped to handle nuanced discussions about art and reality and its connection. There are whole ass books written about it. I know this is super terminally online discourse, but it does bring up some interesting jumping off point to talk about how people engage with art and media and create fandom spaces around it. Because either side will just, like, waffle pancake you to death because they think that just because you are making one argument that is quote-unquote associated with one side, that you also believe everything else they believe, and it's just constantly people putting words in your mouth, and it's just really annoying. Now, I'm first going to talk about my issue with pro-shippers. First of all, they're really not honest about what they want. They try to paint themselves as people who want to discuss dark stuff in art or have mature themes in fiction, but it will be very often that you will see these people talking more about things like, I don't know, like teacher-student Omegaverse or something, instead of meaningful dissections of art. And the antis do this in a different way, but I think both sides are equally susceptible to only engaging with art that they view through an escapist lens, or art that personally makes them comfortable, rather than art that makes them uncomfortable, art that makes them think about something else. It makes them, you know, maybe question their place in the world, and they're both guilty of this. Pro-shippers just are much more vocal about them wanting to not censor art, but they just refuse to engage with anything. And I don't know, I think they're just really dishonest. Because again, they try to, like, hide themselves under this, like, veneer of, again, free speech warriors and being really vague, but about, like, what they want, when in reality, they just want to, like, wank it to weird porn, which, like, I don't care. You can do that. It's a free fucking country. Not gonna be very soon, but you know what I mean. I'm kind of referring to the specific people who have, like, the emojis and shit in their display name, you know, the types of people I'm talking about. Because, like, if you had all these like, their argument is that it's normal, but if it was normal, why are you trying to speak in codes and trying to get mad at anyone who calls you out on what you are trying to do? Speaking of dishonesty, if we're talking about the people who call themselves anti-harassment who are in this campaign, that is a load of because that is just a complete lie. I know many people, including myself, who have been dogpiled by these pro-shippers in the name of fiction and simply for disagreeing with them. They talk a lot about, oh, you should set up your own boundaries, you should just not engage with things that make you uncomfortable, just block, don't harass. And then they get mad at you for saying, don't interact with me if you're a pro-shipper, which is, like, the dumbest thing ever. I thought setting boundaries was okay, but I guess not. Another thing that the pro-fic side does that annoys the hell out of me as someone who is trying to get a degree in media studies is this idea that, like, fiction doesn't affect reality. Yes, it does. Like, yes, it, like, absolutely does. Fiction has been used as a propaganda tool for literal centuries. Fiction has been used, not even used, sometimes just unintentionally just teaches people things. I know the Jaws effect is something that can probably be disproven, but a lot of people are scared of sharks because of Jaws. That is just a fact. People who are scared of clowns because of it. There was a huge raise in, whatever the phobia for clowns is, put it up on the screen. When the movie came out, and there's like Gen X kids and millennials who are like, who don't like clowns because of that movie. Are people thinking, oh, rabbits eat carrots? No, that's not true. They don't do that. And those are just trivial examples, because it's done a lot worse. It's a pretty privileged position to have, to think that fiction doesn't affect reality. I mean, the KKK was literally revitalized because of Birth of a Nation. And I've seen a lot of people trying to argue against that fact because of this debate, and it is partially incorrect, because not only did it revitalize the KKK, but made them even stronger and brought more people to attention to the KKK. I don't think D.W. Griffith's popularity is properly understood now. Like, he was the shit, especially in American cinema, and people don't understand how important he was as a, like, film creator in modern times, because he didn't just have Birth of a Nation. Most, like, old-timey film tropes came from his movies. And the Klan were not as powerful, like, the 30 years before this movie happened. They were actually on the decline, but when this happened, there were plenty of Klansmen who started entering US politics, and there were already, but there were definitely a lot more after this one when they brought attention to it, and specifically bringing attention to them as the saviors of modern America. Like, come on. What about the hundreds of years of Orientalism that is so ingrained in American culture that people just do not have any understanding of how any North African or West Asian nation actually works? And they have this exoticized version of entire countries, entire peoples, millions and millions of people that they do not even view accurately because of fiction. Because that's their only way of engaging with it. What about all the propaganda movies? Why do propaganda movies exist if fiction doesn't affect reality? Why does the military have contracts with Marvel and stuff and have specific guidelines on how to portray themselves if not for propaganda? Some other thing I've seen that a lot of pro-shippers and shit do is they keep using the arguments that they use to justify to themselves, which, again, I don't care what you do. I don't really care about that anymore because I'm like a grown-ass adult. I don't care what people do with fiction. I don't care what fanfic they write. Like, whatever, who cares? But they try to use that excuses that they make to themselves, like the arguments of, like, fiction doesn't affect reality, against very real instances, because I at least appreciate the consistency, but it's really ignorant the way that they use things. So I think one of the big examples is that this video has been in the drafts for a very long time, but as I come back to this, there have been recently some Neil Gaiman allegations, and that are true. I don't say allegations as like a dismissing way. I say it in like, these are definitely true. I do believe the people who put them forth. And a lot of people have been bringing up the fact that Neil Gaiman has apparently written characters who have done the actual things that he has done in real life and has punished them in the story for them. And people saying that it doesn't matter to point this out because fiction doesn't affect reality, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I'm sorry, but the article that has been going the most detail into the accusations has explicitly stated that, like, most fantasy writers are aware of how vulnerable their fan bases are. And he specifically appealed to a group of people that needed escapism, that usually use that as escapism, and tried to signal himself specifically as like a feminist writer, sympathetic to marginalized people, and oh my god, he hates abusers. And he did that specifically to abuse people. It is already a very well documented thing that people tend to get into the arts to get access to vulnerable people that they can then abuse, and ignoring that and saying, oh, well, fiction doesn't affect reality, this is blah, blah, blah. He literally did that as a part of his abuse and grooming tactic. Like, I don't know how to tell this to you, but some people just fucking suck and they do shit like that. Now, everything, again, that I have been saying is not every single pro-shipper. It is not every single anti that does this shit. But it's a really good chunk of them that I've seen. Like, enough for a lot of these types of things that I've seen to get, like, thousands of likes. And it's like, that is a problem if you are willfully trying to ignore all of that. These people also think, like, I've talked with a few of them, especially recently, they think that, oh, fiction doesn't affect reality because I'm one of the smart ones and I'm able to discern fiction from reality. And I'm like, no, you're not able to. I don't think you are, because if you thought that, you're going to be susceptible to propaganda. Like, I'm sorry, that's just how things work. People smarter than you and much smarter than me, who probably have translated things extensively, fall under myths of fiction, because we are humans and we tell stories to each other. That is a human activity. So, of course, the stories we tell each other are going to be important and affect our lives, because that is literally just a part of fucking basic human psychology. A lot of these people have convinced themselves that there's this extremely, defined line between fiction and reality, when anyone who knows anything about history or politics can tell you that that is complete horseshit and also just a really dangerous thing to think. The simple act in, for instance, history of referring to certain eras or periods, say what we think of the medieval ages or the Proterozoic era, like any time, that is itself falling under a fiction of sorts, if you get me. It's trying to cobble together an idea, a clear narrative, a story of what has happened before us, when obviously things aren't really like that. And it's mostly done for convenience, if I'm being quite honest. Because it's honestly a lot easier to say, like, ancient Egypt as opposed to... Like, everyone knows what you mean when you say something like ancient Egypt, but in reality, that idea we have of ancient Egypt is kind of like 5,000 years of human history kind of mashed into one thing. Like, it is just easier to get the point across. That's why a lot of terminologies for different subclasses and different disciplines, if you go any deeper into any of these fields, they will tell you that all of the labeling is basically conditional, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know. That is a line between fiction and reality that's a little blurred, because you also think of how with historical documentation and stuff, a lot of that has only been accessible to higher classes. So we only have documentation of higher class people. So we don't have literally documentation of about 99% of people. So we have to kind of do some guesswork, or the very rare instance that things like communication and preservation have been allowed to those people. You do have to create a fiction for reality sometimes, because that is what historians do. They have to look at a bunch of different accounts from a bunch of different people who all live different lives and try to fit it into a little box that fits into a narrative, a clear, linear narrative that is always moving forward, rather than that just not being real life or reality, funnily enough. And I'm sorry, but especially as someone who's really passionate about history and politics, this kind of thing of thinking that you are incapable of having any propaganda work on you because you're smart and you know how to separate fiction from reality is so incredibly dangerous and just blatantly incorrect. Because if people who can speak a billion goddamn languages and know how to translate and localize ancient manuscripts and understand the historical context, if those people are still falling under some of the fictional traps of nationalist identity, then you can too. And even with propaganda, only stupid people and conservative-leaning people only fall for propaganda. Do you know how many leftists I've seen online, retweeting QAnoners or the Taliban or something like that, and being like, oh, they're based because they said that capitalism or colonialism are bad. It's like, yeah, fucking obviously those things are bad. They just say a few fucking buzzwords and a bunch of leftists will, like, ride them into oblivion. It's insanity. Also, how do you be anti-censorship but think that fiction doesn't affect reality? Just a question. Because censorship exists because fiction does affect reality, and people know the power that art has. And thinking that fiction doesn't affect reality while also being anti-censorship is just not an opinion that you can have. And fiction doesn't affect reality does not only apply to, like, bad stuff. Because there are tons of people who have gone into NASA because they were huge Star Trek or Star Wars fans. There are people who've become writers because they've really liked a book. There are people who've become lawyers because of To Kill a Mockingbird. And to deny that fiction can affect reality almost feels like an anti-art statement. Like it doesn't matter, that art doesn't matter, that telling stories doesn't matter, that it cannot change your perspective, that you cannot become a whole different person because you heard a wonderful song or you read an incredible book or watched a movie that moved you to tears. It even counteracts the argument that a lot of pro-shippers use, which is coping. Honestly, I am going to get into how people genuinely coping is weaponized by antis sometimes a bit later. But honestly, the way that they say is also very dishonest, because I see a lot of them say, oh, I told my therapist I do this and they said it was fine. But did you tell them the part that you're posting this publicly and for other people to jork it to? Because if your therapist said that that was a good idea for you to take art for you to cope with your trauma, to post in a specifically sexual context for the consumption of other people, and they said that was fine, I think they need to be fired, or you just lied to them. Because, honestly, at this point, we see how dishonest that pro-shippers are. Because, again, my main issue with them is dishonesty. When I see people asking, what is a pro-shipper? I see people frequently saying, well, it just means that you shouldn't be harassed for the art that you make. And that is a statement that I think most people, myself included, can agree with. No, they're only talking about fanfiction. They're only talking about, like, shipping and shit. They are not wanting to actually engage with explorations of this. They just want an excuse to get their rocks off, which is fine if they were honest, but they're not, so who cares? And again, some are. Some are, in fact, discussing that stuff. And I respect them because I like talking about art. But, again, this is about, like, the worst I have seen from both sides, and especially, like, the vocal majority. Or vocal minority, I don't care. These are, like, why I don't really assign myself to both sides, because people have, like, binarized it in such a really specific way. The idea that this is a two-sided debate rather than a pretty complicated one is kind of annoying, because honestly, as of recently, I haven't really wanted to associate with antis either. To some degrees, I do agree with antis on some stuff. And I made most of this video, like, months ago, and a lot of it was being sympathetic, but honestly, my recent experiences have soured them to me, and I don't like them very much. Some of it is, like, genuine ideological conflicts, but I guess also, I just disagree with a lot of them. Simple as that. I know they say, like, oh, you can explore dark media as long as you don't fetishize it, but I'm gonna be honest, a lot of these people do skew on the younger side, so their media critique skills are not ideal, so they kind of accuse everything of fetishizing and shut down any kind of discussions that make them even mildly uncomfortable, and I don't really agree with that. Something I mostly disagree with, and you are fine to disagree with me, this is just, like, my take on it, but I really don't mess with the concept of irredeemable media, and I think it's honestly quite silly. It's something a lot of antis adhere to, and they either don't do it consistently, well, no, actually they never do it consistently. Irredeemable media is this idea that if you interact with this piece of fiction, you are inherently a bad person, no matter what you think of it, no matter how you think of it. And I don't know if I entirely agree with it, or I think it's applied to really stupid things and it's very selective. This is not about people who are just curating their own space or are just uncomfortable interacting with fans of something, or even people who have pretty normal value judgments. I respect that people do not want to interact with people who are fans of media, of things that have directly harmed them or indirectly harmed them, whether it be misrepresenting the culture and group that they come from, or spreading really bad stereotypes, or encouraging the dehumanization of a certain, or even sexualization of a certain group of people. People are well within their right to set boundaries and express their anger and just not want to interact with something that the creators do not see them as human. Or just not wanting to hang around people who are in some way complicit into normalizing negative ideas about the groups that they're in. I am completely sympathetic with that. This is not about that. And people need to have more empathy towards that. Because I'm in a privileged enough position where, yeah, I do run into ableist and queerphobic stuff, but not everything has those. Things like systemic racism and even misogyny are so ingrained into society that art will end up reflecting that, whether the artist has intentions to be explicitly political or not. And again, people are within their right to not want to be around fans or not want to interact with something that, again, just does not see them as human. And that's fine. People should be okay with that. Respecting why people come to certain conclusions, because you do not come to that conclusion when you have a life of no hardships. It's usually because you've experienced a lot of hardship and you don't want to be reminded of it, and you don't like seeing it being normalized, and it could be really upsetting. And I understand that. This is not about that. And there is a lot of privilege in the opinions that I have, and I am not by any means 100% correct. I am just, sharing what I think about this certain thing. I just want to make that clear before I get started. My opinions on this whole specific trend of irredeemable media that's been going around since the Tumblr days has been something I've held since about 2019, when the Has Been Hotel pilot came out, and a lot of people were saying, do not follow me if you like Has Been, because it's irredeemable media, because it's problematic. And these people were liking Danganronpa. Like, are you kidding me? Say what you will about Has Been, and boy, do I have a lot to say about it. I'm making a video series about it. You should subscribe. If we're ranking things on a problematic scale, I think that Danganronpa is like 1,000 times worse than Has Been, and it's not even close. Like, I'm sorry. But it is an extremely hypocritical way of viewing art, and I don't like it, and I think it's stupid and dumb and gay. I think another issue that I have with the whole irredeemable media thing that kind of goes hand in hand with, like, being an anti is thinking that you're irredeemable for liking this media, is that I think it's just really liberal. Trying to signal your morality to other people based on the product that you consume rather than anything else. It seems more about getting into arguments and feeling good about yourself because you consume the good thing with the unproblematic people who made it and the unproblematic faves than anything else to me. Because, okay, look, I see a lot of the time irredeemable media being applied to things where a certain person on a creative team is bad, because it usually is sometimes just like one person, where that is seen as like, oh, you're a bad person for liking this. But why is the same logic not extended to the manner in which the actual piece of media was made? Because I see a lot of people getting pissed at people for liking Ren and Stimpy because John K is a deeply evil man, which he is. Like, I think someone should beat him with hammers in Roblox. But not extending the same thing to mangaka and any manga. Osamu Tezuka, the guy who started anime and manga, like, low-key died from overwork. Some of the biggest names in the entire industry have died from overwork. And even if they have millions of dollars later on in their life, like, you could fix, like, most problems with money, but the damage that was done to their bodies when they were working in that career eventually catches up to them and they die an early death. That is not okay. So yeah, I can understand not wanting to interact with something because someone did a bad thing on the group, but you should at least also extend that to the fact that sometimes the media that you consume can literally kill people. Or they don't extend it to Jujutsu Kaisen, which also abuses its workers, or liking Konami games. Konami literally threatened to take Kojima's own company off of the Japanese healthcare system because they left him and didn't agree to their stupid terms. Like, are we just gonna agree with that? Like, are we just gonna... I never see this shit brought... Like, I have never seen, in the cases of irredeemable media, I guess other than, like, Has-Been Hotel, and the working conditions for the workers being brought up as a reason to not, like, support or consume a product. It's always about, like, moral allegiances, which I think is just very stupid. I see it as very naive. I am being a hypocrite right now because I actually do love Metal Gear Solid and I do love manga, but we have to be real with ourselves. When you start putting up standards like this, it's not about actually holding yourself to those standards. I've very rarely seen people have consistent, like, standards for the media that they consider irredeemable and not. It's more that they make excuses for themselves. Oh, this is okay to like because it's this. Or this is okay to like if this creator is a bad person because it doesn't show in the art that they make. And I bring this up specifically of the whole like, oh, well, the creator did something bad, but it doesn't show in the art, is because they still sometimes don't apply it to certain other works. So, for instance, I don't know, Five Nights at Freddy's. People will say, oh, it's fine for me to like Five Nights at Freddy's, even though Scott Cawthon used a lot of the money he made from the games to donate to Republicans who were trying to legislate gayness out of existence. Like, that's fine because it doesn't show in the work. But then getting mad at, like... And again, I do not fuck with Harry Potter fans. Like, I am going to be completely upfront. And there is, like, stuff that shows in J.K. Rowling's work. But, like, how selective they are, because it's fine. It's like, it's rules for me, not for thee. Because, oh, I can like the problematic creator, but the work doesn't show up. But then the second it's something they don't like that has a problematic creator, it's like, oh, even if you pirate it or you aren't directly financially supporting them, you are advertising their work and giving them clout. And it's just like, it's so insanely hypocritical. It is so obvious that people just, like, have a grudge against something, and they personally don't like it, and want to find a reason to morally justify the way they feel. And, again, having boundaries, fine. If you personally like something that's bad, but you don't like another thing that's bad because it just doesn't affect you as much, that's totally fine. But it's just really, really hypocritical, and just petty, and silly. I don't know. It's just not a productive way of engaging with art. I desperately need to read more, but two of some of my favorite books are Basketball Diaries and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And those are both diaries / portraits / autobiographies of extremely flawed individuals. And I like them because of that. I like nuanced portrayals of bad people. I like realness. I like just aggressive awfulness because I find it interesting to see you are in the worst of people and anyone could become this. I find that a very interesting thing to discuss, and I enjoy art for that reason. Yeah, I do like art sometimes because the person is bad and their badness reflects in the work. I like to see that perspective because it kind of helps me understand and conceptualize of the worst people. You have a portrait of someone who's terrible. Now you can learn how to not be like them, how you scarily relate to them, because everyone is a human. I don't know I know this isn't the perspective that a lot of people have, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me and get really mad for that, but that's just what made going through life a lot easier for me, is just understanding how the minds of certain people work, especially bad people. It's helped me grow better as a person, I think, because then I can catch myself seeing, oh, I'm falling under these bad things that they're doing. I should, correct myself into changing rather than not. And I'm thankful for that. And they're also just really good books. I would highly recommend reading them. It is one thing to financially support a bad person. I understand where that complaint comes from, and talking about, like, oh, even giving it publicity, even pirating it is bad, but you can also apply that to quite literally any work, because, again, I've never seen people being consistent with the ways that they apply the irredeemable label to certain things. And I totally understand if people disagree with me on this part, and that's totally fine. I totally respect people's opinions, and I totally respect, like, not giving platforms to shitty people, but I just wanted to give my perspective on that whole thing. I also think the whole irredeemable media thing really discourages critical thinking. And what do I mean by that? Well, you're only going to see people calling something irredeemable media, even if they liked the thing before, after they see, like, a Twitter thread or a Tumblr post on, like, blank is problematic and here's why. And the thing is, these people are not capable of understanding why something is bad. Look, I'm not saying everyone comes out of the womb with, like, perfect literacy skills, and I get that. There's a lot of things that I have to learn from Twitter threads, because, you know, I live a certain life. I don't live anyone else's life. There's certain things that I've never even considered could potentially be harmful or helpful to certain people, because I just haven't had that experience, and that's totally fine. I get learning about things on the internet, because I think the internet at its best should be about learning, but the way in which things are just regurgitated, I think this is less of an issue with a specific group of people, like quote-unquote antis, and more just the internet and just people parroting things and not knowing what they mean or what they say. I get that, but, you know, it's only after, like, Twitter thread something comes out and people consider it bad, and it's like, okay, I see. After how many threads do you actually start applying those skills to something else? And to the point of being critical about the media you consume, which is something that I generally agree with. The thing I disagree with in the way that people see, like, being critical of media you consume, it seems to only apply to the socio-political implications of something sometimes, but it's also, again, very selective with what they choose to focus on and not. Firstly, with the antis, most recently, there was some VN that came out, well, it's a series of VN. I don't know anything about Class of '09, but I saw more complaints about there's feet in it, supposedly from people who say that fiction does affect reality. I saw more complaints about, like, feet than actual racism in the game. There's, like, a Palestinian slave ending or something, and I don't think that's okay, and I think it shows how selective they are with their critiques, and that it's more about, oh, I don't like this because it's weird, rather than I don't like this because this is genuinely harmful. And I don't appreciate that very much, and I think that's really bad. And secondly, it's this idea of being critical means only bad stuff, but having good media literacy and good criticism is recognizing what actually works about something. Because I am of the firm believer, and this is going to be a controversial opinion, that the determining of how quote-unquote problematic something is reliant on the actual quality of the media that you are talking about. Though I'm not just talking about people being selective with what they quote-unquote cancel. I hate that word, but I can't think of a better word for what to use right now. Certain media that has just as bad content in it as the things that they like, but they refuse to look at the media they like, but it is about, I think, what is worth engaging. I do not believe in irredeemable media for a vast majority of the time, but I think the one exception I would probably make to this is Crash, the 2004 movie, not the 96 one. I heard that one was really good. I'm just going to use that as an example, because that movie is not a good movie. It is not well written, and I guess there is quote-unquote powerful scene, but it is all in service to perhaps the worst message I have ever seen in a film, and that is saying a lot. And if you are willing to engage with something like Crash, which is just not good, I think, then I think Crash is worse because it is not a good movie. Because it's bad, it's poorly written, and it is all in service to, again, a very bad message. But, for instance, if I were to meet someone who, say, enjoys, I'm trying to think, like The X-Files, which is a show that I've been watching. That's actually a pretty good show from what I've seen so far. But it is also propaganda, and it does have a lot of stuff, but it's a well-written show, so there is a reason for them to like it. There is absolutely zero reason for someone to like Crash other than the message that it is putting out, because there is nothing else of substance in the film. Do you know what I mean? If you like The X-Files, it's not about you enjoying the propaganda, but it is about, oh, I really like the character dynamics. I really like the practical effects. I really like the cinematography and the story and all that stuff. But with Crash, there's none of that. There's not really, I mean, I guess there's like okay cinematography, but there's nothing else there. That's what I'm trying to get to some extent. But that's also why I think a lot of pro-shippers are very dishonest about why people enjoy things. They frequently use Game of Thrones as an excuse, like, well, most people like dark fiction, so... Well, the thing is that people like Game of Thrones for... I haven't watched it, so I'm just parroting what other people have said here. The characters, and the fights, and the politics in the show that are all complicated and interweaving, and like, oh my god, there's like, this kingdom is beefing with this one, and this... And, like, the world building. Like, people like it for that. They don't like it for the incest. And if they do, they're fucking weird. You're not saying, like, you say, oh, I'm watching Game of Thrones because that show is fire, and I love Daenerys and Jon Snow. That fight in the last episode was crazy. Oh my god. They're not saying, yeah, I thought that rape scene was really hot. Like, if they say that, like, you're going to look at them really fucking weird. That is also another part of the pro-shipper dishonesty. And also, something that antis need to understand is that being critical of the media that you consume is not simply pointing out the socio-political infractions that it does, like CinemaSins ding, which is something that I'm guilty of doing, okay? Like, I'm not gonna pretend that I don't do that. But is rather understanding a piece of art as a whole, and I don't see this approach to art being done. It's always like, it does this specific thing rather than understanding the wider context on how it spreads certain propaganda or how it is harmful. It just says it has this, so therefore it is bad, but not actually exploring it in a meaningful or, you know, deeper way. And understanding that, yes, things that have bad things in it can, in fact, have also good things in it because things are complicated is really not that difficult to understand. And you're going to become a happier person when you are not, and again, I'm saying this as someone with, like, pretty serious OCD and overthinks everything and is like, oh, you did this thing, so that means you're evil and you have to die now, that kind of thing. Understanding what makes something work will just make you like the world a bit more. Because it is actually easier to verbalize. Okay, this is like such a off tangent. I'm so sorry. This video is all over the place. I just have a lot of opinions on this. Understanding why something is bad, it does feel more objective in some ways. Like, critique does feel more objective, but learning how to love something is very difficult, and it is worth the toil to actually understand a piece of art and how it works, because it will make you better as an artist, and it will make you feel better as a person, that someone can craft something to be enjoyed by other people, to make someone happy, to make themselves happy, even if it's just very self-indulgent. And I think teaching about media criticism in a more holistic way, in, again, a non-CinemaSins approach to it does this specific infraction, will lead to much more nuanced discussions and the improvement of art and people recognizing what they did wrong a lot better, because that's just how criticism works, and I think that needs to be encouraged a lot more.
And I guess, like, the last thing that has completely turned me away from antis is the way that they treat, like, pro-ship minors, because, okay, I could say all this disclaimers and all this shit about whatever, but, like, it doesn't matter, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of the time they're sending people to dogpile and harass children who are currently or have gone through a very recent abuse, and trying to not just police the way that they talk about their trauma, but like rationalize it and like try to further isolate them from their peers because, oh, they're coping in a way that's like uncouth or something. When in reality, all they're doing is just like opening them up to being in extremely vulnerable situations, because then they're going to lose their support and safety net. I get like having personal boundaries over if someone's pro ship or not. I get that, but like it just feels like a very insidious way to try and isolate children who are either currently or recently undergoing abuse. And I've seen this happen multiple times because they are constantly, irresponsibly trying to be like, haha, lol, look at this disgusting piece of shit pro shipper. Aren't they so stupid? Aren't they so like dumb and awful? And it is literally every single time it is a child who is being abused. And at some point, pattern recognition has to set in, and you to realize, I think this child who is in pro ship twit is being abused or something. And I understand having boundaries. I understand that, but I can't help but see a lot of this as, and it's not just antis either, it's really both sides that weaponize and make a more hostile environment for survivors to exist in fandom. On the pro-shipper side, you have the encouragement of really unhealthy coping mechanisms and being completely uncritical of it, because coping always equals good, in a very similar manner to how eating disorder circles online work, where it's like, oh, keep doing that, that's really good for you because anyone who hates you is just ableist, like that kind of thing. It's a very similar approach to understanding coping, and I don't think it's good. There's also like this cultish mantra. A lot of them like bringing up that one paper that says that antis are a cult, which, first of all, I've heard was disproven many times, and second of all, like, the weird way that pro-shippers talk about antis is very cultish and just sets off alarm bells to me. Antis are also guilty of this, but not to the extent of pro-shippers, I believe. It's everything from how they approach, like, the whole Neil Gaiman situation to the way that they try to instill that anyone who even holds mildly different pro-shipper beliefs are, like, cultish Bible-thumping Puritans who just want you gone. And I think antis are also guilty of falling under weird, like, in-group, out-group bullshit mentality. They do that a lot too. But pro-shippers, like, I think feel even more morally superior than antis, which is very strange, but you know what I mean. Like, the ways that I've seen pro-shippers specifically try to identify being pro-ship as, like, a minority or try to associate it with, like, gay rights is, like, some of the most, like, self-aggrandizing bullshit I have ever seen in my goddamn life. And it's like, oh, wow, you're such an activist because you fucking wrote Bakudeku porn. Wow. I'm so proud of you. You are truly the first brick thrower at Stonewall. God bless. Okay, I got totally off topic. I just totally forgot to talk about, like, the really, like, oh, these antis, they're just cult people and they don't understand us smart intellectuals, like, that kind of fucking bullshit that happens with pro-shippers where they think that shipping is activism to them or something, like, synonymous with activism. It's just, it's so annoying to me. I'm so sorry. But anyways, more importantly, I've seen a lot of them outright triggering survivors or attempting to trigger them. I've seen that a lot from pro-shippers. I've seen them also try to deny people's trauma or say that they're lying simply for disagreements. I've seen antis do this too. I've seen everyone do this. Like, just stop telling people that they're lying about their trauma simply because they disagree with you. Like, can you, even if it's a really bad opinion, like, someone can, like, have something horrible happen to them and still have a bad opinion. Like, that is not. And on the anti side, I have seen, especially as of recently, people who have been coping unhealthily or healthily, doesn't really matter, in private, and this being leaked out to the public and them being labeled as a pro shipper that you should unfollow, when like 90% of the time that I've seen this is just not even true. Them having to be forced to relive their trauma and be put on trial for their trauma in public because of a call out, because they dared express their post-traumatic stress disorder in a way that is uncouth or unbefitting or uncomfortable to onlookers. And if this is all about protecting survivors, then why are you treating survivors like fucking garbage? I don't like that. I really don't like that approach that antis have also been having with it. I do think one side is a little bit worse because, again, I know more people who have been dogpiled by pro shippers and have had, like, genuinely horrific harassment campaigns thrown against them for simply saying, I think racist content should be moderated on AO3. Just very normal things to say. But I don't like the approach that both people, because it seems like they're both like weaponizing survivors and treating one specific person as a monolith or something, and I really do not appreciate that, and I think it's bad. I think that's bad. At the end of the day, I want to make art with some darker content, darker subject matter, and when I look at this debate, quote unquote, these quote-unquote both sides, which I think it's a lot more complicated than that, but I see one side that's gonna just take my art and just fetishize it and just use it as yank material and not take it seriously, and then another side that's just immediately going to jump to conclusions that I'm fetishizing the material because they don't have the skills to understand what I'm talking about, or that I don't know how to explain it. It's just antis will try to describe themselves as being like pro discussion of any like darker or controversial subjects in art as long as it's not fetishizing, but like a lot of them do not have the wherewithal or like the media literacy skills to view what is fetishizing and what isn't, and they just kind of throw it out there and just kind of make blanket terms. I see also a lot of them fall under this trap that, like, believing that any discussion of something like, for instance, incest is, like, inherently fetishistic, which I think, from what I've seen from especially fandom creators who are survivors of that specific crime, it only further alienates them, and it's really disheartening to see that, especially for something as traumatic as that, when antis are just further perpetuating this idea that, oh, it's just like, it's always, all discussion of it is fetishistic, all of it is bad, and it's really disgusting, I think. That I think is, I think, my biggest issue with them, is that they try to champion themselves as being like the real people who want to discuss darker themes in art, but they are just as bad. Neither of them want to be uncomfortable by the art they have. They only want things that make them comfortable. They only want things that validate their own worldview, and I think I've said this before, I find that a fascist impulse. Like, congratulations, you've made discussion of art very difficult because you have to take a side, and I don't think there's a side, quote unquote. I think it's just like every other internet discourse, just excuses to feel better about yourself. And I don't know. I don't care what someone's label is. I care about how they actually interact with the art. Because I have seen reactionary impulses from both sides. And I do think, again, one side has done more infractions. Again, I have seen much more harassment campaigns from one side. I have seen more fake claiming and attempting to trigger the opposition from one side. Not to say that antis don't do it, because I do think they do. I have seen them do that shit, and I think no matter what opinion you have, you should just cut that shit out, just stop, and be quiet forever and get off the internet and go fishing or something. Basically, this video is just a long way of saying that this discourse has basically ruined any potential interesting or nuanced discussions you can have with art, because one idea you can have then allows people to presuppose a bunch of other ideas that you could potentially have about something, when in reality things are not that simple, and have made discussion of anything relating to this so exhausting it is not even funny. So I kind of hate both of them for ruining potentially really cool or interesting conversations one could have about art. I might make another video clarifying my points on this, because this is a pretty contentious topic and I probably phrased some things pretty poorly. Please be patient with me. I have autism. I I have a mental disorder. I can't phrase things perfectly. Sorry about that. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. So, what are your thoughts on this whole thing? Because I have more. I have a lot of thoughts. I'd like to do more of these off-the-cuff videos where I just kind of ramble about something unscripted, just so I can, upload a little more frequently than like 3 times a year. What kind of stuff would you like to hear me ramble about? And just leave a comment below if you agreed with anything I said or disagreed with anything I said. I would actually be interested in hearing that. Yeah, so just tell me. I want to know. What would you like to hear me ramble about? And I will see you next time.